Welcome.
RSA Security, good to see you again.
Welcome. This is the Congressional Internet Caucus Advisory Committee's RFID Roundtable. This is we've done several events on RFID over the past several years, but we're sharpening our pencils and putting more of a focus on RFID with this coming year and with our coming program. With regard to this particular event today, Dan Caprio, I am not Dan Caprio, in case you're wondering. Dan Caprio is supposed to be facilitating this event, but I think he got stuck in some kind of...
There he is.
Oh, there's Dan. Hoorah.
So, with that, welcome Dan. That's Dan Caprio, our moderator, facilitator for today. But before I get going, this issue is broad. It cuts through many different sectors. We're very excited to be hosting this discussion. This issue, as we move forward, is going to require a tremendous amount of congressional leadership. So in that regard, I am very pleased that Congressman Goodlatte is here today. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Internet Caucus, as well as the chairman of the Agriculture Committee, and he's on the co-chair of the subcommittee on the courts, intellectual property, and the Internet in the House Judiciary Committee. So if I can ask Congressman Goodlatte to make some remarks. Welcome, Congressman.
Tim, thank you very much, and thank you all for turning out. This is a great turnout, and I first want to thank Tim Lorden and everybody at the Internet Caucus Advisory Committee and Internet Education Foundation for supporting these great events of the Internet Caucus, which is a group of about 180 senators and House members who are interested in technology issues. Tim mentioned I'm also chairman of the Agriculture Committee. Lots of people talking about putting RFID chips in animals. They are not what we're here to talk about today, but this is a great technology, and it's one that we shouldn't be afraid of, but we should be very aware of its uses and potential misuses as well. So this is an outstanding panel. Radio frequency identification is an exciting technology transforming business processes as we know them. RFID works by storing identifying information on computer chips. This identifying information can be retrieved by an RFID reader. There are passive RFID chips that do not have an internal power source and must be powered by a reading device, and active RFID chips which do have an internal power source used to power the signal coming from the chip. As you know, RFID technology has far-reaching policy implications for privacy, security, health, and spectrum, and has the potential to increase efficiencies in every sector of our economy, from healthcare to retail to military to agriculture. From tracking goods in distribution chains to tagging livestock to making toll booths and library checkouts faster and more efficient, RFID is an increasingly prevalent technology in our economy. As innovation spurs less expensive and more efficient RFID devices, this technology has the potential to help reduce costs for businesses and consumers alike and provide exciting applications for consumers. We welcome our distinguished panel of experts here today to participate in our first in a series of roundtable discussions under the RFID Roundtable project, and we look forward to all of your remarks. We thank everyone here for their attendance again, and hope you'll join us for future events as we take a very in-depth look at the capability and policy implications of RFID technology. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, and I'm so glad Dan is here because I would have been a very poor substitute for Dan. I'm going to hand it over to Dan Caprio, who is now the Executive Vice President for the Progress and Freedom Foundation. Before that, Dan was in the Department of Commerce, Technology Administration Department. He was also the co-chair of the Intergovernmental Task Force on RFID. Before that, he worked for quite a while with Orson Swindle at the Federal Trade Commission, working on a lot of different security issues and every type of consumer issue you can possibly imagine. So we're thrilled to have Dan kind of facilitating this dialogue, and that's really what we want it to be, is more of a dialogue, a discussion, rather than just a series of presentations. So we want feedback from the panel, but I'm going to give it up to Dan. But before I do, I want to point out that part of the other reason we held this event today was the distribution of this RFID Policymakers Guide for RFID to congressional staff and other folks in different government agencies. We're going to be circulating this through the postal system within the Hill to every congressional office. I would be remiss if I didn't thank how it was developed was by a committee, which is the worst way to draft anything. It's a terrible way to do it, but everybody got a chance to, security experts, privacy advocates, folks from different type of sectors all had their hand in shaping the balance of this particular piece. And it's really just to give you an overview of RFID. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank EPC Global, VeriSign, and Motorola for helping underwrite the cost of actually printing it in full color. Usually we don't do anything in full color because it's too expensive, but on this one it was very important. So with no further ado, if I could introduce Dan Caprio to facilitate the conversation and just introduce Undersecretary, it'd be great. Dan?
Well, thanks, Tim. And Tim and Congressman Goodlatte, thank you to the Internet Caucus, and thank you for hosting today's event. I mean, we see that RFID is a, excuse me, a very promising technology. It's a technology that enables innovation and economic growth and competitiveness. As we think about RFID, it really is the sweet spot, if you will, of technology policy, because it involves privacy, security, standards, and interoperability. Really, excuse me, all the issues that are in play. So today's topic is important. I thought I'd just take 2 or 3 minutes to try to set the stage. RFID really has a number of potential economic benefits. There's excuse me, a range of predictions, forecast, if you will, that are out there that run the range from, say, $3 to $6 billion of RFID systems, hardware, software, and services, and the number's growing. But the forecast range is anywhere from, like I said, $3 to $6 billion between now and 2008. There are many common uses of RFID that are already in place today, such as Easy Pass, facilities to subway, anti-theft devices for automobiles. There's a number of public benefits, and Congressman Goodlatte mentioned a few, but just to highlight briefly, within the pharmaceutical sector, for instance, is utilizing RFID for quality assurance and anti-counterfeiting. The healthcare sector is utilizing RFID for blood tracking to ensure correct blood type. A number, mentioned food safety, but a number of applications in food safety, not the least of which a prime example is product recalls. Transportation safety, we've heard a lot said about the new Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Boeing's announced plans to integrate RFID in the new Dreamliner. Numerous internal business applications related to RFID that all surround evolving speed and efficiency of manufacturing and distribution. And of course in retail, we'll hear more about retail, but Walmart and Target and others, but they're already beginning to see real dramatic improvements in on-shelf availability. In fact, I mean, Walmart did a study last fall that reported reducing out of stocks by 16%. The federal government's utilizing RFID. The Department of Defense reports that their implementation of RFID in the supply chain in fighting the war in Iraq, the Marines, that they've cut inventory value in the supply chain from 127 million to 70 million. Obviously an issue of importance today and to policymakers is privacy and security. Many of the current RFID uses don't implicate privacy and security today. They're mostly in the supply chain, and the ones that are being utilized, for instance, like Easy Pass, is consent-oriented. So what that really calls for is a comprehensive public-private partnership that's needed to create voluntary self-regulatory solutions and standards that both respect and protect the need for privacy and security and gives consumers the tools and choices they need to protect themselves while sustaining innovation. So privacy and security really are two sides of the same coin and need to be baked in at the beginning to build trust and confidence. And I know Paula Breening's going to speak to that in just a minute. So really for an emerging technology like RFID to gain broad acceptance, accurate information about the technology, its benefits, its applications and challenges are a vital component of an ongoing and constructive dialogue like the one that we're having here today. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Crisanti, who's the Undersecretary for the Technology Administration, to provide some opening remarks. And then why don't I just go ahead and introduce the panel so that, because we're short on time. And then following Robert's opening comments, we can just go in order, starting with Doug Forey, who's with McKenna Long and Aldridge, Elizabeth Board with EPC Global, Jeff Richard with VeriSign, Paula Breening, Center for Democracy and Technology, and last but not least, Shannon Kellogg with RSA Security. So if each of you could just describe in 2 or 3 minutes what you see as the major public policy, both opportunities and challenges related to RFID, and then we'll have some interaction and try to get to audience questions. So, Robert?
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, Congressman Goodlatte, for your leadership in this space. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the interest of the Internet Caucus and congressional leaders like yourself. I'm honored, deeply honored, to be on a panel with as many experts as are here today on RFID technology. I am fond of saying when I talk to friends and family about this issue that if you care about commerce, if you care about competitiveness in the United States, you care about RFID technology. And it is ubiquitous. And so I'm happy to see such a great turnout today for this for a discussion that's this important. I agree completely with the points that Dan raises, and I think you'll hear them repeated numerous times today. That is, importantly, one of my central pet peeves and what I have been agitating inside of the federal government's discussions on RFID technology is interoperability. We need to pound on interoperability. It is an essential component of everything we do with regard to wise stewardship of federal tax dollars that are so hard to obtain, and taking them from people's pockets. We want to make sure that we spend those dollars wisely. That's the purpose of the intergovernmental and the interagency working group that Dan Caprio sat on and helped co-found with Alan Estevez at the Department of Defense, and which has been meeting since 2004 to discuss RFID issues, to make sure that we have an open and public discussion of activities that are going on in the various agencies. I invite you to pay attention to the workings of that group and to its meetings. They're open, so if you have an opportunity to stop by or an interest, we will make sure to accommodate you. So interoperability from a governmental perspective is very important for us. The second issue that is essential is privacy and security. And if we don't do more to step out quickly as an industry and as government to give people a clear understanding of what the issues are surrounding privacy and security and how they're implicated in this space, we're going to have difficulties. We're going to have suspicions of the technologies that are being implemented, and it's going to retard the growth rate that we would like to see come from this, and the efficiencies that we can gain from RFID technology and technological implementation. The sectors are almost universal. I can't think of a place where you can't put RFID to productive use. If you if you things that are as important as intellectual property protection, there are ways to authenticate and certify intellectual property and products through RFID technology. There are so many important developments that are going on in that space, and we have experts that have more knowledge of that subject here than I do. But I do want to commend to you all. I'm very impressed, especially Tim, for a work done by committee, how well this brochure came out, because I think it hits all of the high marks of what you want to see if you're trying to get a basic understanding of RFID technology and its place in the world at the moment. I think I'm going to stop here because I'm here really importantly to hear from the panel and to really field questions from the audience to let you know of my interest and the interest of my office. And I'm available. You can contact us through our website, and I hope that I'll continue to be active with all of you here. I'll yield now. We're going to go with Doug.
Gentleman from California.
Thank you.
Is now recognized.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. My name's Doug Fari. I'm a managing director at McKenna, Long & Aldridge. I've been dealing with RFID-related issues for quite some time. Pleased to be here, and thanks for your attention. I think that it is very appropriate that these forums are being put on by the Internet Caucus, the Congressional Internet Caucus. The reason for that is, and as I look around the room, some of you are probably too young to remember this, but some of the same questions and concerns about RFID were raised when the Internet first started gaining wider public acceptance. And like the Internet, RFID technology has been around for years. You have probably been using RFID technology, even if you didn't know that you were using it, in a wide variety of applications, from the Easy Pass in your car that pays your tolls to the ID cards made by companies like HID that open up the access to your elevators or to your office buildings. The Department of Defense has been using RFID for a number of years, tracking inventory and supplies, using companies like SAP to help integrate the data that they're collecting. When the Internet first started becoming more widely used by the public, there was, as I said, concern from a number of voices and a number of camps that the Internet would be a tool primarily to invade people's privacy. There was legislation cropping up all over the place, particularly at the state level, our fountains of experimental democracy, putting various limitations, restrictions, regulations on various Internet applications, largely in reaction to some of those public concerns or fears about what the Internet might do in their lives. As with the Internet, the same is kind of taking place with regard to RFID. I don't know how many folks here follow state legislative activity, but Tim asked me to speak a little bit about what's going on in the states. There are almost 20 state legislatures right now that have introduced, moved, or passed legislation affecting RFID in some way. Most of that legislation really revolves around consumer privacy related issues, and in most cases are in response to high-profile media examples of potential abuses of RFID-related technology. As an example, the state of Wisconsin recently signed into law legislation that would prohibit the unauthorized implantation of an RFID chip under an employee's skin. Now, to me, I don't care whether it's an RFID chip or a cranberry. I don't want my boss implanting something under my skin without my permission. But it speaks to sort of the fear about RFID, the technology, what its implications are. Given what RFID is supposed to be used for, it would be as if a state legislature was passing legislation to prohibit the unauthorized tattooing of barcodes on your wrist to keep track of their employees and their comings and goings. I mean, it should be illegal already, any unauthorized surgery. So other states, again, largely are looking at legislative efforts, for example, to post warning notices or place warning tags on products that contain RFID tags, putting burdens on retailers to make sure that they deactivate RFID tags before products leave the store. Again, there are some legitimate privacy and data security issues that can and should be addressed given the nature of RFID and how it works. I think that perhaps, just as we saw in the Internet when the early legislation was being proposed as to how best to address those issues, some of the solutions looked very silly in retrospect. There were all sorts of proposals in the mid-'90s, and folks like Congressman Goodlatte in the Congress and Dan Caprio at the FTC were working on these issues. But requiring the posting of 16-point font warning notices on each web page where a commercial transaction might take place. Now, if you're using one of these products today, what is a web page and what is 16-point font when you're looking at an Internet web page? So be aware of the fact that state legislatures are looking at RFID use. It's usually a prelude to federal activity, and I think that these issues are important to look at and to address. That's all I have.
Elizabeth?
Hello, thank you. I'm Elizabeth Board. I'm with EPC Global. EPC Global is a not-for-profit standards organization. We're made up of over 800 companies that are global international companies who have come together to develop the standards for the Electronic Product Code, or EPC, which is an application of RFID technology. I just want to briefly go over why standards are so critical. You're very familiar with cell phones, and if you travel internationally, you know that you need cell phones that operate on at least 3 different standards to have your cell phone work when you hit the ground. This is not only very inconvenient, but it's very expensive. And the Wall Street Journal just reported last week about the fact that we don't have all the cell phone applications in the U.S. that are in the Asian market because of the issue of standards and not having one global interoperable standard. So that is why these 800-plus companies came together to work on one global standard for the Electronic Product Code. These are not only consumer product good manufacturers and retailers, but we have aerospace companies, automobile manufacturers, pharmaceutical manufacturers, and transportation and logistic companies. So it cuts across a wide swath of American and global industry. I would have to agree that as far as the key public policy issues, I would agree with our leader in technology at Commerce, interoperability. This is key for business as well as government, and also privacy. If consumers are not confident in this technology, the Electronic Product Code will remain in the storeroom. It will be a supply chain application, and consumers will never see the terrific applications that can protect us against counterfeit drugs and can make our life more efficient and simpler. I'm looking forward to the day when I can go into an electronics store and point my cell phone reader at a television set and download the consumer reports immediately on that one item. And I'm looking forward to being able to go into a grocery store and not have to wait in a checkout line. And I'm interested in making sure that the food supply is monitored in the cold chain through tags with sensors, and that the drugs are protected in the supply chain. But none of these applications will come to fruition if the consumer is not absolutely confident in the technology.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Jeff?
I'm Jeff Richards with VeriSign. VeriSign, some of you may know the company, some of you may not. We're probably best known for, you'll see our logo on a lot of e-commerce sites. We secure about 87% of the e-commerce sites in the world. We are also taking a very active role in the RFID community. We work very closely with EPC Global and GS1. We actually run the root directory for EPC Global here in the U.S. and have sponsored or taken part in about 70 different RFID-related projects all over the world in the last 18 months. In Japan, Korea, China. We just did a project with the largest retailer in China. And I think, from our perspective, we've been at this now for a few years. We have a pretty, I think, reasonable view of this technology. First of all, it's wonderful to see everybody here. We sponsored the document that's being passed out because education is one of the biggest challenges we have around this technology. I think, as you've heard everybody say here, getting people comfortable and understanding what RFID is moves the ball forward in terms of the technology and how it can be used in commercial applications. And the example I always use, I have an 8-week-old daughter, and when we picked her up out of the nursery at the hospital, she had a little RFID tag around her arm. And that was to validate that she was our baby, and of course we wanted to make sure we got the right one. But it's uses of the technology like that I think are becoming more and more mainstream. You've got people who are cruising through tollways using RFID technology, checking into their office using RFID technology. So RFID is not just about tagging products in stores. It's about a rather ubiquitous form of technology with a lot of different variations, EPC being one use. And to the correlation of the Internet that someone made earlier, a lot of the privacy and security issues that are out there, those are real issues. They're not going to go away. They're real issues. But just as we've seen on the Internet, I think the commercial sector does a pretty good job of developing technologies, innovating and investing to solve and battle the issues that are out there. The bad guys will always come up with ways to spend money to go after new technology, but the good guys tend to win their fair share of the battles as well. So from our perspective, education is a huge battle that we're helping to win. Global standards, you heard a little bit about interoperability, a bunch of different words to describe that. As of today, one of our challenges is getting an interoperable global standard with countries like China. So with RFID, there are two standards that we really focus on. One is the air frequency, so the actual radio frequency that is used to communicate with the technology. And secondly is the data structure that sits on the tag. And as of today, EPC Global and GS1 are working very hard towards this, but we don't have a single standard throughout the world. So if you are a large retailer in the U.S., for example, who imports 30 to 40% of your products from overseas, not being able to receive those products with a standard, think if everybody was still using a different barcode, that's a real challenge. So that's something that we're all working very hard towards, and I think you'll see more and more coming up in the public policy discussion. And then lastly, the intersection with some of the other major initiatives that are going on in the country. Pharmaceuticals been mentioned a number of times. There are increasing efforts to try and combat counterfeit pharmaceuticals. And counterfeiting here in the U.S., somewhere between 1% and 2% of the U.S. drug supply is counterfeit. Overseas, in China, it's estimated to be as high as 40 or 50%. So that's not only an issue if you're a drug company who's losing revenue, it's an issue if you're a consumer who's ingesting a placebo or worse, something that's going to actually do damage to you. So we're seeing a lot of interest from other countries, Korea, Japan, China, about how can we use RFID to potentially combat that problem because it's so much bigger than it is here in the U.S. But RFID is very intertwined with those efforts, and there are a whole bunch of other concepts that are going on there. So thank you all for having us today, and we look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. I'm Paula Breen with the Center for Democracy and Technology, and I see so many familiar faces here today, but just to let you know, CDT is a nonprofit public interest advocacy organization, and we advocate for civil liberties in the digital environment. We've been involved with RFID for about a year and a half. We've had a working group on RFID technology and privacy. And on May 1st, we just released best practices for RFID deployment, consistent with good privacy practices. It's an interim draft, and so we're looking for more input on that, and I would recommend it to you. And I'd like to hear what you think and get some additional feedback from people like you who are here in the room. CDT does believe that RFID offers tremendous benefits, and I don't need to recap what we've already heard here. Benefits for government, benefits for businesses, and probably most importantly, benefits for consumers and citizens. But I feel now a little bit like I'm preaching to the choir by saying that building privacy in at the beginning isn't just a truism. It is something that really needs to happen if you're going to really get optimal advantage of the benefits that this technology can offer, and if you're going to have the trust you need to get the kind of acceptance on the part of consumers that you'd like to see. And I think sort of to just talk a little bit more about, why this is such a challenge. Clearly, this technology is something that's been around for a long time, but there's tremendous attention being brought to it at a time when I think there's a proliferation of data collection and also a lot of attention being brought and a lot of awareness on the part of the public to enhanced surveillance. I think you open the papers these days, and I think there's a lot of awareness that a lot more data is available for review, whether it be by business or by government. And so bringing out this kind of a technology at this time, I think, presents some special challenges and ones that need to be met. Key to addressing this, I think, is to really figure out, where does this technology raise real privacy concerns and where does it not? And I think the rubber hits the road, obviously, when there's personally identifiable information involved. But often, I think it can be difficult to figure out when PII is really implicated and where it's not, and so that requires some really thoughtful analysis, really looking closely at the technology, closely at the business models and the applications, and making sure you've fit the privacy in where it really belongs. CDT really believes that traditional notions of fair information practices that we've been looking at, adhering to, debating, discussing probably for the last 25, 30 years are still probably the most fundamental protections we can put in when it comes to RFID, as it has been with a lot of other technologies and different models of information collection. But I think that what is really, really key here is optimal transparency to consumers. We're talking about a technology that you can't see, and a kind of data collection that often individuals may not be aware of or think that they may not be aware is happening when it's happening. So the more information we can put out there about what this technology is, what it does, when it's being used, the more trust eventually that you're going to be engendering with consumers, and that is really, really key to making this technology work and to really reaping the benefits that it can offer.
Well, thank you very much, and it's also a pleasure to be here. If you're not aware of who RSA Security is, we actually are the guys that created invented a lot of the technologies that are available out on the internet today around security. The RSA Laboratories, which is the heart of the research center, or excuse me, which is the heart of the research that goes on at our company, has been working on RFID issues for a number of years. And if you haven't checked out some of our papers and different technology concepts, go to rsasecurity.com/go/RFID. The issues that have been raised in today's panel, I think, pretty much outline some of the challenges and opportunities that we have before us related to RFID. I would agree with Doug in particular to say that it's way too early to legislate in this area. Some of the legislative proposals are actually really probably going to prevent the growth of the industry and the growth of the number of applications that many of the folks have talked about today. So we should be very cautious about the unintended consequences of legislation. That's not to say that there aren't real issues around security and privacy. We've been out there for a number of years saying, in fact, there are. But we have done that based on our research and have some of the smartest people in the world looking at this issue. We think it's important for us as the public and private sector to get our hands around the security challenges as well as the privacy implications today, and to start building in security early on. I heard several references about the internet, and not to make some of the same mistakes that we did with the internet from a policy perspective. Well, I have to say I want to reiterate that. It's important for us not to put our heads in the sand and say that there aren't security challenges and not try to address those early on, because the sooner that we can do that, I think we can enable the growth of this technology. There's a real opportunity before us. How do we do that? Well, we heard several references to standards. I think it's important, in addition to talking about promoting the adoption of the EPC standard, how can we also advance standards and best practices work as the private and public sector to make sure, again, that we incorporate security and that will enable the use of the technology early on. There are opportunities to do that. We talk about some of them at RSA Laboratories. There are a number of other initiatives as well. I guess the last thing I'd also say is that, I'm very cautious about government having a role in terms of legislating in this area. I think that that's generally a bad idea right now. But government does have a role to play in terms of being a procurer of this technology. So when you talk about procurement practices and government clients saying, as we look at the different applications out there, depending on the risk involved, it would be important for us to ask those that are selling us this technology to actually ask them to start building in more security. I think government has a role to play in that respect. And I'll just turn it back to Dan.
Shannon? Well, I think what I'd like to do is just let's move directly to your question. So if you stand up and identify yourself, and if you have a question for an individual or a question for the panel, but let's get right into the questions. Yes.
Yeah, we are engaged at RSA Laboratories in a number of standards initiatives, including the IEEE. We have in the past been engaged in the EPC. There are a number of other standards organizations that we're members of. I think it's very early on in terms of looking at
any specific standards.
We were involved, again, early on in the development of the Class 1 Generation 2 EPC Global. Right. Right now, we are not engaged in terms of efforts that are specifically standards initiatives that are looking at the security area. We are calling for more activity in that space in relation to RFID.
To be specific, we've co-chaired the security working group at EPC Global, and also have been co-chairing the software action group as part of EPC Global. I would say we're involved in looking at other standards bodies, but we're directing the bulk of our efforts towards EPC Global and GS1 because we believe that that's where the bulk of the leadership today is and will be for the foreseeable future. So,
I just wanted to say that EPC Global is a user-driven standards organization, and so we work on the standards that the users ask us to work on. And right now, the standards that would be relating to security issues would be, for instance, in the healthcare applications for pharmaceuticals. The working group that's working on standards in that area is looking at using the technology and seeing if that needs to be part of the standard for pharmaceutical applications.
Yes, sir.
My name is Chip Foley. I'm with the Steel Recycling Institute. Verifying the Steel Institute represents most of the major steel producers in the United States. I commend you folks for this brochure. I just saw it today, and I did notice that you did mention recycling. And point number 4 on the environment. I guess it's a question and a comment I have. I noticed when we talked about challenges, we didn't talk about recycling. Just to give you an example, with the steel industry, we made 100 million tons of new steel last year. We used 75 million tons of scrap to make that. As more and more products come into our system that may have copper antennas on them, we have a major contamination problem. So there is a substitute, and we'd like to be able to work with you folks and see if we can work it out. I also want to mention that my friend from the glass industry and the paper industry is really here today. We'd like to talk to you offline and see if we can give some information. Any comments you can make on that?
I think the effect of the tags on the recycle stream is an important issue, and I think that it's good that we address this now before there's a critical mass of tags. It is early. We do have some public policy people looking at this issue, and I would like to talk to you more about working more together on that so that we're prepared for when there is a critical mass of tags out there. I think we also cannot overlook the advantages for recycling with EPC and RFID technologies. It's going to be a lot easier to sort things for recycling that have tags. It's also, I think that EPC or RFID applications are also going to make a difference for hazardous materials and identifying hazardous materials in the drums and keeping all of those issues straight. So I think that there are advantages for the environment, but right now you're absolutely correct. We need to address the effect of the tags on the recycle stream.
The only thing I would add is there are a number of companies, Motorola is actually one of them, that are working on actually developing a printed antenna, so using a conductive ink to act as the antenna for the RFID tag. So you would actually end up with actually very little metal in the actual tag. We're not too far away from seeing that technology become a reality. You can get beta forms of it today, but actually being able to print right onto the packaging or embed it in the packaging at some point without the same sort of a metal content that you'd see in an antenna today.
I was going to make a similar point in that the recycling issue also comes up in the printed tag technology, and that I talked to a company just a couple weeks ago that was printing RFID labels with metallic ink on cardboard boxes for shipping containers, and there was some question as to whether or not what impact that might have on recycling those cardboard containers with the metallic ink on them. So there are any number of issues that could be talked about today. We're just touching on a few.
Yes, in the back row.
Fran McCullough with the recycled paper. And yes, the answer is our people do think that the metallic inks, when they come along, could be a problem. Whereas, a hard chip, we can probably screen out, depending on the size of it. But a metallic ink then becomes part of the process, and it's similar to the antenna, which then becomes a contaminant in the process. So it is important that we work together in the development of these technologies so we know what's coming. That's the other part of it, is we need to know what's coming so the mills know what's coming so that we can potentially screen for these things.
Mark.
I'm Mark McCarthy from the Reed. I want to congratulate the Internet Caucus and its sponsors for this document. It's an excellent introduction to RFID technology. It talks about the contactless payment card that Visa and MasterCard and American Express have introduced recently, and separates it off from the other varieties of RFID and talks about it in a very simple and direct fashion. My question is, going back to Paula's comments on the dealing with the privacy issues right up front, is the way to think about this, what new privacy issues are raised by the technology? For example, the way our system works right now, you've got an RFID-enabled plastic card that's brought within a couple of inches of a reader, and the card information is introduced into the payment system not by means of swiping the card, but by means of this contactless RFID technology. From the point of view of privacy, the question is whether there's any new issue here. There are lots of issues with regard to credit card information and personal information in the financial context that are regulated right now by Graham and Riley. The question is whether, when you introduce the new information into the payment system in this new fashion, have you created any new privacy issues that need to be looked at separately by government and possibly regulated? Our sense is that you don't. I mean, what you've got here is simply a new way of getting information into the payment system. And I'm hoping that as the policy discussions go on here, that sort of standard way of thinking about it is, what are the incremental privacy issues here? What are the new privacy issues here raised by the technology, rather than reopening a whole bunch of other issues that are already present in the privacy world that have been addressed perhaps by older pieces of legislation or by different ways of considering the issue?
Excuse me. I think that in many cases there aren't new issues. I think what you see, though, are new challenges to applying these traditional notions of fair information practices. I mean, you know, you can take, for example, notice. We have this general assumption that, you know, if you are if you're collecting information, you must give notice to subjects of that information to let them know what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, how it will be used, what kinds of protections are available, whether or not you can get access to that information. That's a challenging thing to do in a lot of different environments. When you start talking about RFID, it becomes a little more complicated yet again. And so I think in some cases, the issue of, you know, providing notice to consumers is not a new one. It's how you do it with this kind of technology and these kinds of environment when the whole point is streamlining and making things easier and making things go faster. I think some new questions do come up when you start talking about security, because you're talking about if you are going to be at some point actually holding information on the tag. I think there's a security question that comes up there, and there is also perhaps a question of security of the information as it's being transmitted between the reader and the tag. So that is something new. But in many cases, these are, you know, sort of this is well-trodden ground. We know that these fair information practices need to be applied, but how do you do it in this kind of technology in this kind of environment with the kinds of, you know, trust issues that a technology like RFID raises with consumers?
Take a go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add a couple of other points there. I think Mark's point about contactless smart cards and the use of that technology is a good one because, you know, clearly, at least we see, and I think others on this panel probably see security there in that technology as being pretty good. Now, when you talk about the use of an EPC tag in the supply chain, and it goes back to what I was talking about risk, okay, I think that we all probably acknowledge here that there aren't really a lot of privacy and security issues that emerge there. However, when you start talking about using a EPC tag in human identification, you know, whether it's a passport or it's patients, etc., then some of these issues emerge around security and privacy in a different context than we've necessarily seen in the past. And so I just add those 2 points.
I was going to take now that I'm at the Progress and Freedom Foundation and not in government, I know, Mark, I mean, yours is a question really related to the commercial sector. I do think, though, there is a set of issues that confront government that need to be addressed. I mean, vis-a-vis the collection and storage of information, the e-passport, what DHS is doing with U.S. visit. And what we see is, and that's why Robert's work is so important, both within the Department of Commerce and within the RFID Council, because it's the fear that someone mentioned, the fear of surveillance and Big Brother. And I mean, we have the durability of the Privacy Act, but you know, there's this angst that people feel in general about loss of control of their privacy, but they feel it doubly with respect to government and situations where you can't opt out. And so I do think that's an ongoing part of the debate that needs to be addressed in a robust way.
And just adding slightly to that, and I agree with what Dan said there. You know, I think from a governmental perspective, we have to make sure, at the Department of Commerce, we currently have 7 different email applications, and they don't really interoperate that cleanly with one another. You know, having one agency have one RFID technology and one have another, and a different agency have another RFID technology that are non-interoperable might seem like a step in the right direction from the current splintering we have of technologies. But our challenge is really to create cross-agency interoperability without producing standards that retard innovation, and it's a pretty daunting challenge because we want to continue to work with all of the companies. But I think that we do the best work that we can do when we provide open standards in that regard so that people can engineer to them, so that we have more companies competing, more companies innovating in particular areas. And so one of my overriding concerns continues to be how is that landscape shaping up? And I think that that's one of the challenges for the federal government.
See, there's a problem with so dangerous situation we have.
I was going to say that I think one of the early key questions that arises there is one that was raised by a panel member earlier in another context, which is what is industry doing about the privacy implications? And I think that that's going to be the trigger for anything that actually any of the bullets that actually damage this process are going to be triggered by privacy violations, perceived privacy violations, real privacy violations, where data is treated carelessly and where an RFID application may be involved somewhere in the chain. And so, if we have things like we've had in the past with data loss and identity theft and that kind of stuff, and somewhere RFID is in the chain, I think there will be a high temptation to bootstrap that on and talk about this new technology in a negative way. That's why I think it's important from an industry perspective, and hopefully this is a forum to stimulate that conversation, to really do more to educate, to talk about what RFID is doing. I think this, obviously the brochure today is a great first step, but more focused conversations about some of the challenges. And I know that the Technology Administration under Dan's leadership, maybe it was a year ago, Dan, or a little more maybe, did a roundtable on this as well. I'll commit to you to continue to do that if we have interest from industry. But I think that that's one of the essential things that would be a trigger that I would see in the future to set a real problem up. And so that's why I hope we have a little more progress between here and there.
And Dan, if I may add, I would agree with Undersecretary Crescente. We have to be very careful about singling out RFID. And I think that has been unfairly done here. When you think about the broader data security issues that we face as a country, we've had 34 states pass breach notification data security legislation. Federal legislation is being considered. When you look at that issue and some of those challenges, and then actually to try to single out RFID in the context of privacy and security and legislate that away, we have to be very careful. Some of these proposals in states would actually really prevent the further use and expansion of RFID and essentially throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we have to be very, very careful about that. But again, try to get our hands around the security, legitimate security and privacy challenges as the private and public sector and start building in more security to enable the use of the technology for the future.
Final comment.
Yeah, and I think the risk is broader, the potential risk is broader than just limiting the companies who can participate in the RFID industry to large companies. One thing that often gets overlooked in these discussions are the end users of the technology. So using as an example pharmaceuticals, the FDA is encouraging and maybe mandating the use of RFID for chain of custody verification to cut down on counterfeiting of drugs. If state legislatures or the federal government put too many restrictions or regulations or privacy requirements, increase liability on retailers to deactivate tags, post warning notices, blah, blah, blah. You have a very big user community, both in the retail stores, the chain drug stores, the Walmarts that sell drugs, and also from the pharmaceutical industry who may say, boy, this is way too much of a risk for us to take on. Why should we be asked to use RFID technology versus something else? So I think the risk is broader than just raising the regulatory hurdle so high that only big companies can do it. It may prevent the possible benefits of the technology from being available at all.
Well, I'm getting the high sign from Tim, so thank you very much. Oh, okay. No, I thought we were.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but the question. From Robert's perspective, as I started looking at how it works up here on the Hill, where you have different communities with the financial services working on some of the credit card issues, let's say that's daunting enough. But at least they use the same building to work on these issues. Within the federal government, you have different agencies working on a variety of different issues, whether it be state on the passport issues, whether it be agriculture, and other issues. How do you kind of deal with making sure everybody knows what each other is doing? And that also has issues related to privacy, but also standard security, just even deployment. I mean, with regard to agricultural livestock, chickens, etc., the spread of diseases. That's very important that RFID can better track animals so that we can prevent outbreaks of disease and eliminate the problem quickly. Can you explain kind of the challenges that you have coordinating all the different agencies, making sure everybody's on the same page and moving in the same direction?
Coordination. Thanks for that hard question at the end there, Tim. Coordination is an exaggerated term in the sense that it implies that we are working in a fashion to accomplish a single or drive to a single goal. I think our discussions at this point have been primarily, and Dan has been in more of these meetings than I have, and Doug Devereaux and more still. But I think that's one of our challenges. We are in a situation where we are a group of equals in the federal government sharing information with one another. The Department of Commerce doesn't have the ability to or the interest in telling the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Defense or anybody else what the appropriate stance that their agency should be taking with regard to these decisions around RFID. And I know that the procurement and logistics decisions are often driven by needs that supersede sort of the rational thought and meetings that we have of getting together. Decisions have to be made sometimes because there's an urgent need for them, and we are reaping benefits and savings from the implementation of these technologies, and they're tangible. The difficulty is, as I've mentioned before, all of the challenges that you mentioned are things that are routinely discussed there. The difficulty is talking everybody into the same general direction. And everybody has different stresses in their decision-making process, and regrettably, we can't align them all at one time, all in the same direction. But we're really attempting to do that. That's why if I have, one important word to leave all of you good folks from Capitol Hill with, that is, I think from all of your perspectives, from the perspectives of banking committees, from the perspective of the Agriculture Committee, I think it's important for you to do oversight and to have a conversation and educate yourself and your members about what's happening in this area and how it impacts your particular sector of the economy. Because I think if you care about commerce, as I said before, and I think we all do, then you care about RFID technology. And it's at that point where if I were a congressional staffer working for my boss, as I have been for years, I would be making sure that the members on my subcommittee or on my committee are informed about what's happening so that these things are not surprises to them as they become more ubiquitous.
I would just like to, Dan, could I jump in just for a second? Thank you. In speaking about government uses of RFID, I would just like to add, it doesn't speak so much to the coordination aspect, but just sort of the work that government is doing regarding deployment of RFID. I think that is a very important place where government can bring in privacy and security earlier in their discussions. Dan talked about the fact that these are going to be mandated uses of RFID, and people are going to be required to carry the technology, and that element of choice goes away. I think that there has been limited sunshine on a lot of the work that's being done for whatever reason, and I think it would behoove government in terms of public acceptance and perception to bring more sunshine to those discussions, to involve the public and the privacy and advocates and security experts earlier in these discussions. I've had some conversations, but the the conversations have come pretty far down the road as these new business and government models have been developed, and I think that would be it would be key to successful deployment by government to have those conversations much, much earlier.
I just wanted to make a quick point to add to Robert's point about the importance of the RFID Council and the dissemination of information and consultation, and that's the important role that NIST plays in all of this, which is under Robert's direction, but it's just critically important as particularly in government as standards are being set and considered and the issues of interoperability that I mean, and I know many of you in the private sector, Shannon and Jeff and Elizabeth, sort of recognize the importance of the role of NIST, but in particular, I mean, in addressing some of the government issues with the State Department and e-passport and DHS with U.S. visit, but, you know, the expertise that NIST brings in terms of the actual standard setting and the actual science and the physics of RFID and how a lot of these things work is critically important in terms of to answer Tim's question, sort of the government role of interoperability, and certainly with Robert's leadership, NIST is an integral part of that RFID Council.
I think NIST plays an important global role as well.
Yes. How are we on time, Tim?
Great. We got 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought we just had 60 minutes. Okay, good. Yes. Yeah.
And, my name is Nick Chugas. I work for SRA International, supporting the Department of Defense. But one of the things that we've been discussing throughout this whole thing is the issue of, you know, how do we get the word out? Because we, the proponents of RFID, I don't think have done a good job of telling people how the technology really truly works. I mean, how many people in here know what HF near field or UHF far field works? Okay, so when you get a negative, you know, when you get a negative article in the paper or in some, you know, publication of whatever type, the problem that you have is they see, oh my God, they can read my ID card from 1,000 feet away. Well, you know, I mean, that, yeah, it's true, you could do that, but you have to have a lot of sophisticated equipment, and you could probably see it with a microwave to death before that. But, you know, the issue is, how are we going to provide that information to the people out there that are going to be using this technology so they understand how it works and how it's not going to, get all this information from them as far as their carrying their tag in their lapel or whatever it might be.
I'm going to take that down.
Well, one of the things that was done, you know, 10, 15 years ago when some of these same questions were brought up about the Internet and what it meant for the general public is leaders in government, particularly in the federal government, from the FTC to the Internet Caucus, use the sort of high-profile public platform of the federal government, congressional oversight hearings, you know, reports like the one that was put out today, et cetera, to communicate to the public, you know, how the Internet worked, what the potential benefits were, shifting the terms of the debate away from you know, corporations invading people's privacy, monitoring every click of the keyboard, towards talking about the Internet as a tool to advance distance learning and to bring better health care to rural America and you know, benefits to consumers. I think that there's an opportunity to do the same with regard to RFID in terms of looking at positive consumer public safety, public health types of applications for RFID, and using the congressional oversight hearing processes to highlight those opportunities and to educate the public. I think that you know, there have been a number of campaigns by different trade associations and the like to you know, go to each of the 20 states that are you know, legislating in this area, largely based on limited information or knowledge about how the technology works, and reacting to sort of the press stories that you're talking about that are excessive. And I think that those are fine. I mean, educating state legislators is a fine exercise, but you will have every state legislator still voting against you, even if they're extremely educated about how the technology works, if they think that their public doesn't understand. Politicians respond to public perception, not necessarily facts. And so I think it's important to do more than just educate the politicians. You need to educate the public.
Yes, sir.
Tom Sisti, SAP America. This is triggered by Tim's question, and that is, could you speak a little bit about the dangers associated with bleeding the issues connected with RFID into the issues connected with information sharing? One, that RFID is a technology, a tool, and yes, it has all of these features to it, but the information that is obtained and how that information is used within, between, among agencies, it strikes me as a different issue. That there are governance procedures that have to be addressed there, and what do you do to prevent, I guess, one bleeding into the other, one overcoming the other, and stifling, frankly, the new technology?
I mean, I agree with you. They're two separate concepts. I think it comes back to getting the audience to, maybe this kind of goes to Nick's point, getting the audience to understand what RFID and what it is and what it's not. And RFID is a very simple technology that's been around since World War II. Okay, it happens to be, because of a lot of investment and innovation, it happens to be becoming more prevalent in the supply chain arena and other areas. But it is not. It's not creating entirely new waves of data sharing among agencies and companies. I mean, a lot of the privacy and security concerns that are out in the general public today have come out of the concept of RFID being used in a store, and the ability for a store or a retailer to track your purchasing habits. Well, they're doing that today anyways with barcodes, right? Whatever you're buying, it's being tracked if you have a loyalty card, and they're marketing to you based on that data. That's not a new concept. That's been around for a decade. And RFID is not going to change that equation substantially. There are some new concerns in terms of how the information is read and whether or not you're aware that it's being scanned as you move among the store. Those are the issues I think we need to deal with, but also the data sharing, the data security. I'm personally much more concerned when I open up the paper every day and read about somebody taking home a laptop and losing a bunch of Social Security numbers and bank account information. Much more concerned about that than I am somebody knowing what size jeans I'm wearing. So I think it's important to separate the issues and not let this brand new technology, which is in its infancy, you've got $1 trillion in retail goods being exchanged in the U.S. every year. Not even close to 1% of that is being tracked using RFID today. So we're just getting started. And I think to the questions about legislation and the states' roles and things like that, from our perspective, we are certainly advocating that let's let this get a little bit down the road and make sure we aren't stifling innovation. Let the companies that specialize and focus on security and do it very well today on the internet and elsewhere play a role there, but also address the larger issues that are often outside of RFID that have to do with data sharing and some of the other questions that you bring up, because I do think they're not the same issue.
I think when you talk about interoperability between federal departments and agencies, as Robert has touched upon a couple times, it's not talking about facilitating the sharing of the data that's collected between those agencies any more or less than happens today. And there are, various rules you can argue about whether they're adequate or not, but there are rules in place as to, what government can and can't share in terms of databases between each other. The kind of problem that Robert's talking about that's trying to be addressed is, let's take a company like Cisco, for example, not CISCO, but SYSCO, the food delivery service. To the degree that they are being asked to ship boxes of food to the Department of Defense, military bases, using RFID tags on the crates. If they're being asked to use different RFID technologies or standards for food that they're supplying to the Department of State, different from the Department of Defense, different from the Department of Agriculture, because they supply all of those different federal departments and agencies. Pretty soon it's going to be so cost prohibitive and wasteful for them to have different technologies that they're putting on the crates depending on who they're shipping it to. So I think that's the problem that Robert's speaking to in terms of interoperability and standards, is making sure that we're being efficient in the application of RFID, and that federal departments and agencies are coordinated in putting these programs together. A quickie example, I was talking to somebody at the Department of Transportation who said that there are over a dozen separate DOT RFID related initiatives, from pilot programs to whatever, from everything from dealing with traffic problems to dealing with communication from your tire to the car that you've got a flat, all kinds of experimental uses that are being explored, and yet there is not really a policy within the Department of Transportation itself as to what kinds of RFID they're going to be using for different applications, what kinds of standards they're going to use, et cetera, et cetera. So aside from the interagency communication about RFID and what they're buying and why they're buying it and the standards that they're using, there are even intra-agency problems in the same way. So I think that is, as you say, a very separate issue from sharing of information that's collected by those tags.
I just wanted to add one thing to what you said. One of the reasons the Department of Defense participates in the standards making process at EPC Global is so that there can be one standard, so that a manufacturer making a product that's going to the Department of Defense can put the same tag data standard on that product as they can for a product going to Walmart, and both organizations can read that tag. That's very important. And your question reminded me of a line I heard recently, and that was, it's the data, stupid. And we really have to separate the data management issues from the technology, because today it's RFID. Who knows what it will be tomorrow?
Yes.
Dan Weissy, the Senator Green's office. We have a detailed lead from the military who's echoed some of the hopes, but also some of the concerns that he's heard from service members about RFID. There are hopes that it'll be an extremely effective tool in the battlefield for keeping track of troop movements, especially as the technology becomes for active RFID lengths, distances that the signal can travel increase. They've also had some concerns because they can envision a situation where military regulations require the embedding of RFID within equipment, let's say to keep track of weaponry and ammunition, but also, let's say within clothing, just to make sure in case anything were to happen. And so some of the service members have privacy concerns about their non-battlefield related movements and that sort of information being stored. Whereas in the past there was sort of practical security as far as where they were going during their off hours. Nowadays, it would be those concerns that information is easily collectible, and and unless you have a routine of regularly purging that data, it's still around. It still might be accessible. And I was wondering whether there's military stakeholders or organizations run on behalf of service members who are taking part in these discussions as stakeholders, trying to alleviate those sort of privacy concerns.
Actually, I can answer part of that. We work with Mr. Automotive at the OSD supply chain integration, and we have taken all of that into effect, and we've looked at, we have a policy in place, and we are looking at things like ammunition, because we're not going to place it on ammunition or ordnance, for one thing. Currently, because of what the technology can do to ammunition and other things, but within clothing, we are looking at that, but it's going to be at the package level, so we're not actually placing it on the item itself just yet, until at some point in time the commercial sector goes that way, so we can be interoperable with the commercial side. Because right now we're not, we don't want to have another military standard out there, so to speak, that we had in the past in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I mean, I did 22 years in the Navy, and I know exactly where you're coming from, or that person that you're describing to. But the issue is that we do have a policy in place, and that is being followed by the entire DOD across the supply chain, including the transportation command and that. So we do have something in place. And I can provide you that information as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that the overall issue that he raises is a good one. There are some of the privacy concerns out there, but also it goes back to what I was talking about in terms of the risks involved in how the technology is being used. If you're using an EPC tag in the supply chain, okay, that's different than when you're using it for human identification, whether it's a soldier on a battlefield or if it's an American with the RFID built in to the passport, okay, and you're going into a country where there might be some potential terrorists around, all right, and the use of that to identify you as an American. I mean, there are a whole bunch of issues that are raised there. And I agree with Doug's comment that the press has kind of taken it to a whole new level and that you've got a lot of speculation there. But there are legitimate security and privacy issues that are raised regarding human identification. And I think that it's very important to have that point of view in this discussion because it does certainly impact our military personnel.
The other thing, I just come back to the point I made earlier about that issue is not specific to RFID. I today could probably track, if I really wanted to, track that serviceman or servicewoman using the GPS device in his or her car and his or her cell phone. So there are a lot of devices that are geared towards location, and provide a lot of benefits. But to me, that is a broader policy, governmental issue around how we treat the men and women that are part of the service teams. It's not really an issue to me that's specific to RFID. It's a broader issue because the reality is most of the new generation cell phones do have GPS capability, and most cars have GPS in them. So that capability is out there. It's a question of what is the policy going to be, and how do we develop the policies and carry them out. Concerns about security and privacy. But I think, again, I would raise it up a level and not just focus on RFID around that issue.
Yes, sir.
Matthew Hussey with American Legislative Exchange Council. I know you, Douglas, you mentioned about there's several states that have legislation before them. You had mentioned Wisconsin. I know South Dakota had something similar, to Wisconsin's, and California had last year more pretty wide sweeping one regarding the restrictions of use. But most of them seem to be dealing with the notifying users or consumers that this product, this what have you, has an RFID in it. Are there any other, models that are concerns to the industry moving forward that could inhibit its, acceptance into the workplace or in the industry?
I think one of my key concerns about legislation is that we really don't know what EPC or RFID technology is going to look like in 10 years. And it's just very difficult to write legislation now when we really don't know what the applications are going to be.
Yeah, certainly it's understandable. But how do state legislators balance the ebb and flows, if you will, of ensuring that industry can continue with innovation and new technologies, but at the same time make sure that this information, because the difference between a barcode and RFID is RFID can have unique information, whereas every barcode on a milk carton or on a product is the same, so there's no uniqueness to it. And so how can they balance that to make sure that their constituents are safe? Because yes, every technologies do evolve, but at the same time they want to make sure that there are certain stopgap measures in place concerning their safety of their constituents.
Well,
I think if state legislators or federal legislators or regulators or any government decision maker makes a legitimate effort to understand and learn from not just technology providers but end users about what the issues are before trying to put rules in place, I think that would go a long way towards addressing the problem. I think the nature of politics is such that one way in which all elected officials kind of stake their turf or identify themselves as somebody who intends to be a leader on a particular emerging issue, whether it be the internet or RFID or name your new flavor of the week, is to introduce a bill and start moving it through the process, make it as broad and as onerous as you can, so everybody comes running to you and asking for time to meet with you, and it garners a lot of attention and a lot of love, and and a lot of press and a lot of publicity, and as long as that is designed as an effort to bring up important issues, discuss them, learn about them, and so forth first, I think that that's not a bad process. I think it's when you start putting rules in place on things that you don't understand that it becomes onerous and problematic.
CDT sort of takes, definitely agrees that, legislating on any technology with respect to privacy, for example, is really the wrong way to go, because for no other reason that 18 months later you're going to have another new technology that's going to raise those same kinds of privacy issues. You're going to be having the same sort of tortured discussions about, what's, where is the real privacy question and how do you apply fair information practices. I mean, the way that CDT would approach this is don't focus on the technology, focus on the information, because that's really where the issue arises. And we've been encouraging passage of baseline privacy legislation focused on the information and not on any particular technology. And what that would potentially accomplish is this, in the sense that, industries could move forward with some sense of guidance about what their responsibilities are, and consumers would have some confidence that as a new technology is rolled out, there is some guidance in place, and that their information is going to be handled responsibly and in accordance with these fair information practices that we've sort of gotten used to. That's not necessarily a popular approach with a lot of industry, although there are companies that are beginning to sort of see it that way. But I think it's a one way to strike that kind of a balance that you're talking about.
Time for one final question. Yes, ma'am.
We struggle with this a lot with our organization as well. How do you deal with emerging technology? How do you post staff and guide everybody on the technology? So what we did do is come up with a white paper and a very overarching, broad-based position statement that deals with the principles that we think should be in place for any direction that this particular technology goes in. And if you're interested, our staff person did a good place access to the white paper, and we can also give you the position statement, which is
Well, with that, I'd like to thank all the panelists, thank the Internet Caucus, and thanks for joining us for lunch.